This stuff is Zimmerman and Myers. Zimmerman and Myers were printers. They printed commercial flyers, books, stuff like that. They weren't making Time Magazine or anything like that. They were making local runs, not Kinko's like, kind of somewhere in between. Um, they had large equipment in a light industrial facility. I believe their first plant was in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. I know them from Wauwatosa and from my own personal family relationship with these two guys, which was not that deep, but there it was. And this wargaming stuff that they made was a side hustle. It was something that they were into, and because they were into in that they had a career in commercial printing, they used their commercial printing equipment to create these war games. It wasn't sustaining them. And 99.9% of people that were making, just like today, that were making these kinds of games were doing so on a tiny shoestring budget. At On Grief came out in 1976. These guys could do that because they had printing equipment. Most people couldn't because it was cost prohibitive and logistically infeasible to put printing equipment in your home. That's why when you hear desktop publishing, when that first came out, it was revolutionary because now instead of a gigantic, loud printing press, you had the home computer to do that for you. Then you got even more people making more war games, and more people with more ideas is better than less. So, also, they did not have the money. It wasn't a matter of capability. That's why I put out the next thing. Because you could see, for people that think anything prior to 1990 or whatever, some sort of, caveman era, there was plenty of pictures. That stuff was expensive. Major companies, large corporations, could make color stuff. So, by the time AD&D came around, TSR was no mom pa thing. It wasn't a couple of dudes that made some war games for S's and G's and a couple extra bucks. It started perhaps that way, but by the time they made AD&D, they could secure loans. They were a company, and that's why they could put pretty color pictures on the player's manual. All that stuff is great. That art is wonderful. I'm not putting it down, but and it was cool to look at. It made these products iconic along with the rules that were in them, but there were rules in them. We weren't buying this to hang that picture on the wall. Some people would, or have a print of it or something. Great. But if that thing had come in a plain brown wrapper because I wanted to play a game and not stare at a picture, I still would have played it. The idea that what was within the covers is secondary or immaterial to what's on the cover is nuts. And some people, well, that's not what we're saying. It's the combination thereof. Okay, but a lot of people are very visually orientated. Not because my stuff is so great, but a lot of people will look at a picture. It took me a while to understand this because nobody would offer any real assistance, but that I'm not the only one. That Twitter is largely image based, regardless of the ability to add text to it. More people liked this because Wargame Cool than ever read or understood what this text meant. That's why Jimbo's getting the shaft on the likes and the retweets. So, wasn't putting it out to, make a political statement. It was the only Time magazine cover that I didn't have to pay for. And Ongrief was printed in 1976, and that's what this is about, the time. So the point wasn't to go, yay Jimbo, or I don't like it Jimbo. And yeah, I'm calling him Jimbo, and I don't give a shit. Um, it'll be all right. Uh, it was to show you that a major corporation could afford the color. The little guy couldn't. The little guy made great war games. You know, when Chainmail came out, they weren't the biggest uh, group on the block, and they couldn't afford color stuff. That doesn't mean that the black and white stuff in those things weren't great. They were. They all, but and those, for all you primary visual people, go, well, that's what was great. Okay, but for me, it was the game. Did the art look nice along with it? Yes, but it was the procedures and the material. With I bought the book to read it, and to play the game in it. So another one that I can't visually exemplify, but anybody of the era can confirm, is that there was a unbelievable amount of variety in software in the mid late 70s that wasn't made by any major corporation or even well-known publisher that you come up with. There were dudes in the basement making kick-ass games and copying, going and finding a way to, wholesale distributor, getting 150 discs, something like that, and burning that computer out one by one, making as many as they can, and then going to their local computer store, because it wasn't Radio Shack or all these, huge storefront national chains. There was, like a lot of things, it was a much nicer time because you had a local shop. Just Joe Average six pack and his entrepreneurial spirit with a computer store. Of course, on the flip side, if Joe Six Pack was an asshole, because we had one of those, you were in trouble because you had to drive a lot farther to find somebody that wasn't a complete D-bag. So one of the guys I used to have to go to was just insufferable. But, of course, you're not exactly getting stellar service at the old Best Buy these days, are you? But the point, beyond all that grouchy old man stuff, is that there was people that were making phenomenal games that you may never be able to play or may never have heard of because they were poor dudes. I mean, they weren't, starving, but all they could do was use their knowledge to make something, a product, and make a couple extra dollars by distributing it locally. There were some that got regional and stuff like that. Ask anybody from the 70s. I can't find any pictures because the internet is not, the Library of Alexandria. But there were racks filled with software in bags. And there may be a drawing on the page that tells you what it's about and the instructions on how to install. And just because it didn't have any artwork with it, it didn't change the appeal of it. It didn't change the interest with most people. Sure, is a pretty wrapper catch people's eye? Sure, and that's why the big companies did it. That's why Atari and their stuff, hell, their art looked better on the package than some of the games when you plugged them in because it was so primitive with the sprites and all that. And it did capture the imagination. It was wonderful, but that was a big company. And the guys that were making homemade carts were talented too. You may never see those homemade carts. And you're missing out, and that's sad, but because they couldn't make them in mass. But it wasn't the artwork that made the quality. So it was, the stuff was wonderful to look at and to play. And like I said, yes, sure, there were exceptions. There were exceptions with Atari. Major corporations often put out horrible, shitty products. and maybe the artwork was great. Raiders of the Lost Ark. Some people weren't real thrilled with that game in Atari 2600. Neat art. So it doesn't make, nor does it break, the product. So many people tried to make that uh, case, and it just seems that there was this kind of mafioso attitude that if you go against feeding people this money for their supposed service, then you need to be harangued, harassed, attacked, sworn at, and talked down to. But, I don't think that anybody was doing that to people like TSR, like Zimmerman and Myers, or anybody that was making their own video games back in the day. So uh, the a-hole behavior isn't really making your case. And in fact, is producing more animosity and will engender ill will, and more people will go, you know what, I'm not going to buy that stuff from them the way they act. So, and if you think that you can, Twitter seems to be an endless back and forth of trying to burn anybody that you don't like down through disparaging remarks, mudslinging, intimidation, all sorts of, it is a troll farm. So if you want to act like the digital version of a thug because somebody doesn't have enough money to feed your little enterprise, well, I think your enterprise will be the one dying on the vine. But it's disingenuous. There's nothing altruistic about it. The people don't care about folks that are having problems with cash flow because they just stomped on a bunch of people for not producing cash. And anyway, more than that, the argument that it is a sign of quality is untrue. And your taste may be to looking for art instead of game, but there's plenty of people that are looking for functionality.